They threw Coca-Cola on a waitress for fun, unaware her husband was a mafia boss. Before we start today's story, comment below where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you haven't already. You won't want to miss what's next. They poured Coca-Cola on the waitress for fun, laughing while she stood there soaked and humiliated. To them, she was a nobody, just someone they could mock without any consequences. What they didn't know was that her husband was a mafia boss, and he had just found out what they did to his wife. Elena Ruiz had been working non-stop for 6 hours. The Riverside Grand Hotel's crystal ballroom glittered under 1,000 golden lights. Manhattan's richest people were there, laughing too loud, clinking their champagne glasses, showing off diamonds and watches that cost more than her yearly salary. Elena moved quietly among them, refilling glasses, clearing plates, and pretending not to hear the rude comments or see the pitying looks. To these people, she was invisible, and she liked it that way. Being invisible was safe. More champagne, table 7, her manager hissed, snapping his fingers. Elena nodded without complaint. She balanced a silver tray on one hand and began weaving between tables covered with fine china and silk napkins. Table 7 was always trouble. 5 men in their late 20s sat there, already drunk, celebrating something they called the Crane expansion. Their laughter was too loud, their confidence too sharp, the kind that came from people who had never been told no in their entire lives. When Elena approached, one of them spoke up in a mocking tone. His name tag read Julian Crane. He had perfect blonde hair, bright white teeth, and a watch that probably cost more than her car. "Thought we'd die of thirst," he said lazily. "My apologies, sir," Elena said, keeping her voice calm and polite. She had learned long ago that reacting to people like him only made things worse. As she poured the champagne, Julian grabbed his friend's phone and started scrolling through something, laughing hard. Elena caught a glimpse of the screen, photos of them posing with bottles and flashing hand signs, pretending to be wild rebels when in truth, they were spoiled men playing with their daddy's money. "Elena, right?" Julian asked, squinting at her name tag. "That's a pretty name. You got a boyfriend, Elena?" "I'm married, sir," she answered quietly. "Married?" he repeated, grinning at his friends. They gasped dramatically, pretending to be shocked. "Lucky guy. What's he doing?" "Let me guess. Waiter? Uber driver?" Elena's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to stay composed. "He works in construction." That made them laugh even harder. "Construction? Classic," one of them said. "Bet he's got a beer gut and a pickup truck." She said nothing. She just finished pouring the champagne. The bottle was empty now, and she turned to leave. Wait, Julian said, stumbling to his feet, clearly drunk. The room was loud with music and laughter, so nobody else noticed. "I have a question." She didn't want to hear it, but he continued anyway, voice rising. "When you go home tonight, you gonna tell him about us? About how you serve rich people all day? Does it bother you knowing you'll never have what we have?" He gestured around the ballroom, smirking. Elena's heart pounded. "Have a good evening, gentlemen," she said, trying to walk away. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Julian barked. Then, before she could react, he grabbed a glass of Coca-Cola from the table, one of the sodas they had ordered for mixing drinks, and poured it over her head. The cold liquid hit her scalp and ran down her face, soaking her white blouse. Ice cubes bounced off her shoulders and scattered across the marble floor. The laughter of his friends echoed as women nearby gasped and men turned to stare. Elena stood frozen, the coke dripping from her hair and eyelashes, her face burning with humiliation. She couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The embarrassment felt like something heavy pressing on her chest. The men at table 7 howled with laughter. "Oh my God, dude. Did you get that?" one said, holding up his phone. "Send it to the group chat." The hotel manager appeared out of nowhere, face red and panicked. He looked from Julian's smirking face to Elena's soaked blouse, and his expression changed instantly to fear. "She was rude to us," Julian said casually, settling back into his seat. "Just teaching her some manners." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Crane," the manager said quickly. Then, turning to Elena, he snapped, "Elena, go to the break room." "But I didn't." Elena stumbled away, coke dripping from her uniform, her wet shoes squeaking on the marble floor. Guests turned to look. Some whispered, others just stared uncomfortably. One woman covered her mouth, eyes wide with pity. Another woman looked away entirely. Nobody helped her. Nobody said a word. Inside the staff bathroom, Elena locked the door and stared at her reflection. Coca-Cola had matted her dark hair. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her blouse, the one she had ironed carefully that morning, was ruined. She didn't cry. Crying didn't fix anything. Crying only made you weaker. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her husband. "Marco, how's work, amore?" Elena stared at the message. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could tell him what happened. She could tell Marco everything. The laughter, the humiliation, the video. But then what? The Cranes were powerful. People like them didn't face consequences. They owned buildings like this hotel. They owned lawyers and politicians. If she complained, she'd lose her job. If Marco complained, he'd look like some angry construction worker going after rich people. No, better to stay quiet. Better to survive. She typed back, "Fine. Home by midnight. Love you." Then she took off her soaked blouse, wrapped it in a trash bag, changed into her backup uniform, and went back to work like nothing had happened. What she didn't know was that one of the kitchen workers, a young man named Marco, had seen everything. Marco liked Elena. She was kind to him. And when he saw that video being recorded, his stomach turned with anger. Marco also knew exactly who Elena's husband was. By dawn, a copy of the video would be sitting on the desk of Marco Navarro, the man who controlled every cement truck, every steel shipment, and every construction permit in New York City. But that night, as Elena rode the subway home with damp hair and a forced smile, she had no idea that in less than a week, the Crane family would learn a painful lesson. You don't disrespect a queen just because she's wearing an apron. Rafael Costa had worked for Marco Navarro for 15 years. He had delivered bad news before, arrests, betrayals, missing money, but nothing like this. As he drove through the early morning streets of Manhattan, his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. In his pocket, his phone felt like it was burning a hole through his jacket. The video had arrived at 5:47 a.m. from an unknown number. No message, just a file. He almost deleted it. Probably spam, he thought. But then he pressed play. 23 seconds later, his blood ran cold. By 6:15, Raphael's car pulled up in front of a brownstone in Brooklyn, one that wasn't listed under Marco's name. It had flower boxes in the windows, a basketball hoop in the driveway, and the smell of fresh coffee coming from inside. On the surface, it looked like any normal family home. Maria, the housekeeper, opened the door. "He's having breakfast," she said quietly, her face serious. Marco sat at the kitchen table, wearing a plain white t-shirt and reading glasses, newspapers spread in front of him. His espresso sat untouched. At 45, he still looked like the construction worker he used to be. Strong, broad shoulders, rough hands. "Raphael," Marco said, looking up. "It's 6 in the morning. This better be good." "You need to see this," Raphael replied, placing his phone on the table. Marco frowned and pressed play. Raphael watched his boss's expression as the video rolled. The ballroom, the laughter, Julian Crane smirking, the coke pouring over Elena's head. Marco's jaw tightened. His knuckles turned white. When the video ended, the room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. "She didn't tell me," Marco finally said. His voice was low, almost too calm. "She came home, kissed me goodnight, and said work was fine." "She probably didn't want you to worry," Raphael said carefully. "Worry?" Marco repeated with a bitter laugh. "My wife gets humiliated in public, and she's worried about me?" He stood up and paced to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up, someone walking a dog, a garbage truck rumbling by. Normal life. The life Elena wanted to protect. "I want everything on that kid," Marco said suddenly. "Julian Crane. Everything about him, the hotel, the people there, everyone who owns it." "Boss," Raphael hesitated. "There's more." Watch around the 12-second mark. Marco picked up the phone again, replayed the video, zoomed in, and froze. In the background, behind Julian, stood an older man in a sharp suit, gray hair, holding a drink, looking casual. "That's Edward Crane," Raphael said quietly. Marco's face went pale. "No, not Edward Crane." "Yeah," Raphael said. "Same one." Marco sat down heavily. For the first time since Raphael had known him, Marco looked shaken. Edward Crane, the same man Marco had been secretly doing business with for 3 years. The powerful real estate developer who needed Marco's cement, steel, and union connections to build his empire. Their partnership had been perfect. Clean on paper, dirty underneath. Edward got his projects built on time. Marco's money got laundered through legitimate deals. Edward thought Marco was just a well-connected contractor. Marco planned to keep it that way. "That's his son?" Marco asked. "Yeah," Raphael said. "Julian Crane, 27, Princeton grad, party boy. DUIs buried, harassment cases settled quietly. Daddy's golden child." Marco stared at the video still. He saw it happen. Edward was right there. And he did nothing. Silence. Marco turned back to the window. Then, in a voice that made Raphael's skin crawl, he said, "Call everyone. Meeting tonight. I want everything in the Crane family. Every contract, every project, every permit. I want to know where they keep their money and who depends on us." "Boss," Raphael warned, "if we move against them, that's the end of the partnership." Marco's eyes hardened. "You don't humiliate my wife and expect me to keep building your empire." Just then, both their phones buzzed. News alerts. Crane Group issues statement after viral incident. Raphael opened it and cursed under his breath. "You've gotta be kidding me." The press release was everywhere, sent to every major outlet at 7 a.m. sharp. It said, "Crane Group regrets the unfortunate incident at last night's charity gala. While we support all service industry workers, preliminary investigations suggest the employee behaved unprofessionally prior to the incident." "They're blaming her," Marco said softly. "They're covering themselves," Raphael said. Marco set his phone down slowly. "They think a press release fixes this. They think I'll keep quiet to protect our money. They're wrong." He looked up and gave a thin, dangerous smile. "Call the meeting for tonight. Let's see how they build their empire when their foundation collapses." Outside, the sunrise painted Brooklyn gold. Inside, Marco Navarro had just declared war. That night, the meeting took place in a warehouse in Red Hook. Officially, the building stored restaurant equipment. Unofficially, it was where Marco handled serious business. By 8 p.m., 7 men sat around a metal table under harsh fluorescent lights. They were Marco's captains, the men who controlled his operations in construction, trucking, unions, waste management, all the pieces that made his underground empire look legitimate. Leo, the Hammer Bergosi, 60 years old and built like a bulldozer, spoke first. "We will grab the kid tonight. Make an example." "Agreed," said Nate Chen, who handled cement contracts. "You disrespect the boss's wife, you disappear. Simple." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Raphael stood silently in the corner. He already knew what Marco would say. Marco sat at the head of the table, calm and unreadable, listening to his men argue. "We could make it look like a robbery," said Frank Falcone, the youngest. "Rich kid gets mugged in the wrong neighborhood. Maybe lose a few teeth. Or the torch that the Porsche he drives," Leo added. "Let him explain that to Daddy." "Enough," Marco said quietly. His voice sliced through the noise like a blade. The room went silent. He stood and walked to the whiteboard where photos were taped: Julian Crane, Edward Crane, the hotel, and the Crane Group logo. "What do you think happens," Marco said slowly, "if we grab Julian Crane tonight?" Leo frowned. "He learns a lesson." "No," Marco said. "His father calls the cops, the real cops. The FBI gets involved. Every camera in the city gets checked. Every phone gets tapped. We get heat we don't need. So what? We do nothing. Nate snapped. They humiliate Elena and we just take it? I didn't say we do nothing, Marco replied, eyes cold. I said we won't grab him. This isn't the 90s anymore. We don't solve problems with baseball bats. Leo shook his head. They already put out that press release blaming Elena. They're making her look bad. Every hour we wait, their version of the story becomes the truth. Marco had read that press release a dozen times. Each time, it made his blood boil. Elena had come home last night exhausted. She went straight to bed, kissed him goodnight, and said nothing. She didn't know the video had gone viral. She didn't know strangers online were debating whether she deserved it. This isn't about Julian, Marco said finally. It's about Edward Crane. The men went quiet. Edward's a businessman, Marco said. He thinks in contracts and dollars. His son humiliated my wife because he's a spoiled brat. But Edward, he saw it happen and stayed silent. Then he blamed her. You know why? No one spoke. Because he thinks I need him more than he needs me. He thinks our arrangement protects him. He thinks I'll swallow my pride to keep his money flowing. Marco's voice dropped, cold as ice. He's wrong. From the corner, Raphael finally spoke, and everyone in the room knew things were about to change forever. The Crane Group had 4 major projects under construction, worth about $1.22 billion altogether. Marco stood in front of his crew in a dim Brooklyn warehouse, a remote in his hand. He clicked it, and the whiteboard screen changed to a spreadsheet full of numbers and project names. Hudson Yards Residential Tower. Topeka Mixed-Use Development. Queens Waterfront Condos. Brooklyn Luxury Apartments. Raphael stepped forward, highlighting each name on the screen. Every single one of these projects uses our cement, our trucks, our steel suppliers, and our union workers. People around the table started nodding as they realized what that meant. They're also waiting on permits, Raphael continued. The Brooklyn project needs environmental clearance. The Queens condos need zoning variances. Both are stuck in city council committees where we have friends. Marco crossed his arms. And they're financing? 2 main lenders, Raphael said. Chase and Goldman. Both gave short-term construction loans that have to be refinanced in 90 days if anything runs late. Raphael gave a cold smile. And they will run late if something goes wrong. Leo leaned back in his chair, finally understanding. You want to choke their business? No, Marco said calmly. I want to tear it apart, brick by brick. He looked at the men in front of him. Edward Crane humiliated my wife in public. I'm going to humiliate his entire empire. How long? Nate asked. 1 week, Marco said. Maybe less. He uncapped a marker and began writing on the whiteboard. Contracts, permits, financing, reputation. These are his weak spots, Marco said. We squeeze them one by one. No violence. No direct links to us. Just a chain of bad luck that Crane can't stop. Frank raised his hand. And the kid? Julian. Julian's just a symptom, Marco said coldly. His father's the disease. But don't worry, when this is over, Julian Crane will wish we'd only broken a few bones. What's coming is worse. He looked around the table. Here's how we do it. For the next 24 hours, nobody touches the Cranes. No threats, no vandalism, nothing loud. We focus only on gathering information. He pointed at each man in turn. Nate, get me every detail about their construction timelines. Leo, talk to your union contacts. Find out which projects already have labor issues, and how we can make them worse. Frank, figure out who their investors are and what makes them nervous. What about their money? Nate asked. Raphael and I will handle that, Marco said. We will meet again tomorrow night. Come back with options, not opinions. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. We're not street thugs anymore, gentlemen. We're businessmen. And we're going to remind the Crane family who actually runs this city. The men left the warehouse energized. They understood the plan now. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about power. As they filed out, Leo stopped at the door. "Boss, what about Elena? When do we tell her?" Marco's hard expression softened for a second. "We don't. She's been through enough. When this is over, all she'll know is that Crane's apologized. The rest stays between us." Leo nodded and left. When they were alone, Marco took out his phone. A new text from Elena. "Can't sleep. Keep thinking about work. I'm sorry I didn't tell you what happened." So she'd seen the news. His chest ached. He typed back, "Nothing to be sorry for. I love you. We'll talk in the morning." Raphael watched him quietly. "She's going to figure it out eventually." "Maybe," Marco said, slipping the phone into his pocket. "But by then, it'll be over. Come on, we've got debt contracts to review." They turned off the lights and locked up the warehouse. Outside, Brooklyn slept peacefully. In Manhattan, Edward Crane was probably asleep too, thinking everything was fine. He had no idea his empire's foundation was already cracking. The countdown had begun. Day 3. Nate Chin sat in a midtown coffee shop across from a city planning clerk named Dennis Wu, an old college buddy who owed him a few favors. They talked about basketball, family, and how expensive rent had gotten. Then Nate casually slid an envelope across the table. "My daughter's school fundraiser," he said with a grin. "Hope you can help." Dennis peeked inside. $5,000 in cash. His eyes widened, but he didn't hesitate. He'd done this before. "Of course," he said. "Happy to help." Nate scrolled his phone as if the topic was random. "Are you still working on that Crane project in Brooklyn? The waterfront one?" "Yeah," Dennis said. "Still sitting on my desk. Environmental review. Could take months." "Could it take longer?" Nate asked, looking up. Dennis met his eyes. He understood immediately. "Could take 6 months. Maybe more if a new concerns come up." "That would be unfortunate for them," Nate said. "Very unfortunate," Dennis replied, pocketing the envelope. "I'll make sure it gets the careful review it deserves." Nate smiled, stood, and left. One pressure point activated. Across town, Leo Goy was in a construction trailer at the Hudson Yards tower site. The project superintendent, Mike Harrion, was one of their guys, union through and through. "We got a problem, Leo," Mike said, spreading blueprints across a table. "Crane's way behind schedule. They're pushing us to move faster, maybe cut corners." "How far behind?" Leo asked. 6 weeks, Mike said. "They've got to pour the North Wing foundation by Friday or they miss their milestone with the bank." Mike pointed at the plans. "But here's the thing. The cement order they made. It's coming from Jersey, not your suppliers." Leo's jaw tightened. "They went around us?" "Trying to save money," Mike said. "Avoid union rates. But that Jersey company's having mechanical issues this week. The whole fleet of trucks is down." Leo smiled. "Weird how that happens." "Our trucks could do it," Mike added, "but they'd need to go through official channels and proper union rates. Even then, it might take a few days to schedule." Leo clapped him on the shoulder. "Keep me posted on how desperate they get." As he walked out, he called Marco. "Hudson Yards is bleeding time. They're about to miss a critical pour." Marco's voice came through the line, calm and satisfied. "Good. Let them sweat." Later that day, Raphael met with Rebecca Morse, a risk analyst at Goldman Sachs. They had dated years ago and stayed on friendly terms. She didn't owe him, but she remembered how he'd once helped her brother avoid serious trouble. "I need some information," Raphael said quietly. "About the Crane Group." Rebecca frowned. "I can't just—" "Off the record," Raphael said gently. "Old friend to old friend. She sighed and typed on her computer. They're highly leveraged. Every major project is funded by short-term construction loans. They have to hit milestones every 90 days or their interest rate jumps 2 points. How close are they to those milestones? Raphael asked. Close enough that even small delays would be catastrophic, she said, lowering her voice. Goldman's already nervous. Crane's last quarterly report showed big cost overruns. If these projects stall, we might not refinance them. That means they'd have to find new lenders fast. If they can't, they'd have to sell properties or even declare bankruptcy on their development division. She looked up. Why are you asking, Raphael? Just curious about the market, he said. Thanks, Rebecca. Tell your brother I said hi. Outside, he texted Marco. Goldman is wobbly. One more shake and they'll pull out. By evening, the Red Hook warehouse buzzed with activity. The whiteboard was covered with details. Project 1, Hudson Yards Tower, $340 million. 6 weeks behind. Cement disrupted. Deadline Friday. Bank. Chase. Project 2, Topeka Mixed Use, $280 million. Waiting on steel delivery. Vulnerable. Bank. Goldman nervous. Project 3, Queens Condos, $420 million. Zoning is still pending. Can be delayed by council contacts. Bank. Goldman again. Project 4, Brooklyn Atlantic Yards, $380 million. Environmental review. Can stretch to 6 months. Bank. Chase has the most risk. Marco studied the board like a general before battle. Total exposure, $1.4 billion if you count the loans, Raphael said. $1.2 billion in actual construction value. All depends on us. Nate spoke up. Brooklyn permits are frozen for at least 6 months. I've got 3 city departments ready to raise new concerns. Traffic, historic buildings, wetlands, whatever we want. The unions? Marco asked. Ready to walk out, Leo said. We can create labor disputes that'll stall projects for weeks. All legal, just workers fighting for fair treatment. Frank added, I checked investor calls. Edward keeps telling them everything's fine, but 3 small investors have already pulled out of the Queen's project. They're spooked by the Elena story. Good, Marco said. He circled Chase and Goldman on the board. Raphael, can we buy their debt? Working on it, Raphael said. 3 shell companies ready to buy distressed loans. If the banks get nervous enough, they'll sell cheap to cut losses. Marco nodded slowly. If we control their debt, we control their air supply. They can't move without going through us. He pointed at the board again. Here's the plan. Tomorrow morning, Hudson Yards misses their foundation pour. Tomorrow afternoon, Topeka's steel delivery gets delayed. By evening, Crane's dealing with 2 crises. That's when the banks start calling. When they panic, Raphael's companies offer to buy their loans, and we look like heroes. Nate grinned. They'll never know we're behind it. Marco's eyes were sharp. Edward thinks this is about his spoiled son. He doesn't realize he's already losing a war he doesn't even see. Leo asked, when will he figure it out? When it's too late. Marco checked his phone, a news alert. Crane Group stock down 3% on construction concerns. He smiled slightly. Gentlemen, we're not just planning anymore. We're activating. The men left in the Brooklyn night. Marco stayed, staring at the whiteboard. 4 projects. 2 banks. 1 week. His phone buzzed again, a text from Elena. Can't believe I'm trending on Twitter. People are cruel. But I'm okay. You're the strongest person I know, he typed back. This will pass. I promise. What he didn't write was, it'll pass because I'll make the people who hurt you lose everything. He turned off the lights. Tomorrow, the pressure will begin. At 2:47 a.m., Edward Crane's phone rang. He grabbed it, half asleep. Mr. Crane, said the site superintendent, panicking in his voice. We have a problem. The cement trucks didn't show up. What do you mean, didn't show up? Edward snapped. We have a critical pour at 6. The Jersey supplier says their entire fleet broke down, transmission failures across multiple trucks. They can't deliver until next week. Edward sat straight up, wide awake. That's impossible. I know, sir. But that's what they said. If we miss this pour, we miss our milestone. Chase will fine us $2 million. I'm aware, sir. Call our backups. Edward shouted. Someone in this city has cement trucks. I've been calling for an hour. Everyone's booked, or their trucks suddenly have issues. It's like the whole city shut down overnight. By 6:30 a.m., the site was quiet. No trucks, no pour, just workers standing around getting paid to wait. At 7:15, another call came. Sir, the steel delivery for Topeka is delayed. Traffic accident blocking the route. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow. Edward yelled. We're already behind. 2 projects. Same morning. Same chaos. It couldn't be a coincidence. By 9 a.m., his whole executive team sat in the Crane Group's glass conference room overlooking Central Park. They looked tired and worried. Talk to me, Edward demanded. What the hell's going on? His COO, Margaret, showed a spreadsheet. Hudson Yards cement supplier says mechanical failure. Topeka's steel was delayed by an accident. But here's the weird thing. I called other developers. No one else has issues. Just us. Just us, Edward repeated slowly. His CFO, Charles, spoke up. Chase called this morning. They know about the delay. If we don't pay by Friday, they'll fine us $2 million and might raise our interest rate. On what grounds? Failure to meet milestones. It's in the contract. Edward's jaw tightened. Do they panic after one delay? It's not just that, Charles said. Our stock fell 3% yesterday after the Elena Ruiz story went viral. Investors are nervous. Chase is asking if we're hiding bigger problems. Elena. The waitress. The story he thought he'd contained. Instead, it exploded. People online were calling his son entitled. His family name was being dragged. And now his company was in trouble, too. Get me new suppliers, Edward said sharply. I don't care what it costs. We're trying, Margaret said. But every contractor we contact is either booked solid, charging triple, or making excuses. It's like someone poisoned the well. Edward looked around the table, anger rising. He didn't know it yet, but the poison had a name. Marco. And his empire had already started to crumble. Edward stood up and walked slowly to the wide glass window of his office. Far below, 43 floors down, Manhattan was alive with noise, the hum of cars, the flashes of construction cranes, the constant rhythm of a city that never stopped. This was his city, his empire. He had built it brick by brick over 3 decades. But now, everything is falling apart. Someone was doing this. Someone with enough influence to freeze supply chains, delay projects, and make even powerful banks nervous. Whoever it was had planned this perfectly. The question that haunted Edward was simple. Who? At noon, Julian Crane was sitting comfortably at a luxurious beach club in the Hamptons. The sun was warm, the ocean calm, and a half-empty mimosa glass sat on the table beside him. He was laughing loudly with a group of friends, enjoying the kind of day only a rich kid could afford. Dude, you're trending again, said Chase, his friend, scrolling through his phone. Julian groaned. Still about that waitress thing? Chase nodded. Yeah. People can't let it go. It's all over social media. It was a joke, Julian said, rolling his eyes. People need to chill. Everyone's so sensitive these days. Chase smirked. Your dad's press release didn't help. Made things worse, actually. Dad knows what he's doing, Julian said dismissively. In a week, nobody will even remember her name. His phone buzzed again. Dad called. Julian stared at the screen for a second, then hit decline. He'd already been lectured that morning about being careful and representing the family. He didn't need to hear it again. "Everything good?" Chase asked. "Yeah. Dad's just stressing about business stuff," Julian said, waving to the waiter for another mimosa. "Nothing I need to worry about." But he was wrong, dead wrong. While Julian sipped champagne and joked with friends, his father's company, the Crane Group, was falling apart. Stock prices had dropped another 2% by lunchtime. Two major investors had demanded emergency meetings. Rumors about financial instability were starting to spread online. The empire wasn't just stressed. It was starting to crack. By 4 o'clock, Edward had made 17 phone calls. Every conversation was the same: suppliers apologizing for equipment issues, scheduling conflicts, and unexpected problems. Some sounded genuinely sorry. Others were strangely calm, as if they knew something he didn't. He stared at his computer screen. Project timelines that once looked solid now felt like fairy tales. Everything was slipping through his fingers. His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Crane, Goldman Sachs on line 3. They're asking about the Tribeca and Queens projects." Goldman Sachs, his biggest lender. Edward's chest tightened as he picked up the phone. "Simon, good to hear from you," he said, trying to sound calm. Simon Rothman's voice was professional but cool. "Edward, I wanted to check in. We're hearing some concerning reports about project delays." "Just minor setbacks," Edward said quickly. "We're addressing them." "Minor?" Simon said sharply. "Both Tribeca and Queens are behind schedule. Our risk team is getting nervous." "There's no need to worry," Edward said. "Really?" "Because between the negative press from earlier this week and these construction delays, this looks like more than coincidence." Edward's hand tightened around the phone. "Simon, we've worked together for 10 years. When have I ever failed to deliver?" "There's a first time for everything," Simon replied. "Look, I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you a friendly warning. If these problems continue, Goldman will have to reevaluate its position. We have shareholders to answer to." "I understand," Edward said quietly. "Good. Fix it, Edward. Fast." Then the line went dead. Edward sat motionless, staring at the reflection of his face on his computer screen. Two banks circling. Two projects are frozen. Investors are panicking. Stock falling. 2 days ago, everything was fine. Now, it felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling. His mind flicked back to the viral video, the one of his sons, Julian, laughing while pouring soda over a waitress at a charity gala. Elena Ruiz. Could all this somehow be connected to that? Some kind of revenge? No, that was ridiculous. She was a waitress, just a nobody. What power could she possibly have? He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. Bad luck, that's all this was. Terrible timing. It would pass. He started making more calls, desperate for solutions. Someone, somewhere, had to owe him a favor. But what Edward didn't know was that every call he made, every string he pulled, led back to one man. A man whose wife had been humiliated on camera while Edward watched and did nothing. A man named Marco Navarro. And Marco was only getting started. Across the river in Brooklyn, Marco sat in his office, calm and smiling as updates rolled in. Hudson Yards, stalled. Tribeca, stalled. Goldman Sachs, worried. Crane Group stock, down 5%. He turned to his right-hand man, Raphael. Tomorrow we tighten the noose, he said. The war had begun. And Edward Crane was losing before he even realized he was fighting. The next morning started with a phone call Edward never wanted to hear. "Mr. Crane, this is Diane Chen from the Department of Environmental Protection," said a polite but firm voice. Edward's stomach sank. "What's this about?" "We've received concerns about potential wetland disturbance at your Queens waterfront project. We'll need to conduct an additional environmental assessment before approving your zoning." "We already passed the review months ago," Edward said sharply. "New information has come to light. Possible habitat for protected bird species, Diane said. We take these matters very seriously. How long will this take? Hard to say. Maybe 60 to 90 days. Longer if we find issues. 90 days, Edward said, almost shouting. That project breaks ground in 3 weeks. I'm sorry, Mr. Crane, Diane said calmly. You'll receive official notice by the end of the day. Then she hung up. Edward stared at the phone. Another anonymous tip. Just like the broken cement trucks, the steel delays, the missing permits. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Someone was pulling strings, and they were good at it. By 10 a.m., rumors started to spread online. A small blog called Urban Development Watch published an article titled, Crane Group Projects Face Multiple Delays. What's really going on? It didn't accuse anyone directly, but asked uncomfortable questions. It mentioned the viral video of Julian, supply issues, and permit delays. By noon, 3 other real estate blogs had picked it up. By 2 o'clock, the New York Post ran a piece titled, Crane Group Facing Construction Headaches. By 4 o'clock, Edward's investor hotline was exploding with calls. Edward, what's happening? Demanded Marcus Chen, a major investor from Hong Kong. I'm reading about permit problems and supply issues. Should I be worried? Absolutely not, Edward said. Just bad timing. Bad timing. Marcus snapped. I've invested $30 million. I hear delays could last months. I'm not comfortable with that. We're handling it, Edward said, forcing calm. The same week your son humiliates a waitress and your stock drops 5%? Forgive me if I see a pattern. Marcus, I've never missed a deadline. There's a first time for everything, Marcus said coldly. I expect answers tomorrow. The line went dead. 3 more investors called. Different voices, same fears. Edward could only repeat empty reassurances. At 5 p.m., Margaret Vance, his COO, entered his office. Her face said everything. More bad news? Edward asked. The city council postponed the vote on the Brooklyn Atlantic Yards project, she said. They say they need more time to review community feedback. Community feedback? Edward repeated. We already solved all those issues months ago. Apparently, new concerns have emerged. Traffic, historic preservation, public hearings, all of it. Margaret sighed. Edward, this isn't normal bureaucracy. It's coordinated. Edward nodded slowly. I know. Someone's orchestrating this. But who? Margaret asked. Someone we pissed off, Edward said. They both fell silent. Then something clicked in his mind. The waitress. Elena Ruiz. Margaret frowned. What about her? Do we know anything about her? Margaret pulled up her tablet. Elena Ruiz, 32. Works at Riverside Grand Hotel. Married. Husband. Marco Navarro. Construction contractor. Edward's blood ran cold. What kind of contractor? Margaret scrolled, then froze. Wait, that name sounds familiar. Edward rushed to his computer. Check our supplier contracts, the shell companies that provide cement and steel. Margaret typed quickly. Then her eyes went wide. We signed a deal with Navarro Construction Group 3 years ago. Edward's heart pounded as he opened his private records. Navarro Construction Group. Principal, Marco Navarro. The man whose wife Julian had humiliated was the one controlling the foundation of all his projects. Oh God, Edward whispered. Margaret stared at him. What do we do? If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe and share your favorite part in the comments below. And don't forget to drop a heart to show your support. I need to make a call, Edward said. He called Marco's private number. Ring, ring, ring. Voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. Again. Still voicemail. The message was clear. Marco wasn't taking his calls. At 7 o'clock, Edward sat in the dark, looking out at the city lights. His empire, 30 years in the making, was collapsing. Stock down 7%. 2 banks ready to pull funding. Investors are panicking. All because his spoiled son poured soda on a waitress. No, because Edward had stood by and done nothing. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop calling. You'll get your meeting when I'm ready. Not before." Edward typed fast. "I can explain. Let me fix this." The reply came instantly. "You can't fix humiliation with a phone call, Edward. You should know that by now." Then silence. Marco wasn't after money. He was after destruction. And Edward had handed him the blueprint. At 8 p.m., Edward called an emergency board meeting. 12 tired faces sat around the long mahogany table. "We're under attack," he began. "And I know who's doing it." He explained everything. The contracts, Marco, Elena, the connection. Howard, the company lawyer, went pale. "You're saying our main supplier's husband is sabotaging us?" "Yes," Edward said. "And he's been cutting off our supplies since Tuesday." "Then we sue him," Margaret said firmly. "Breach of contract, interference, everything." Howard shook his head. "We can't. The contracts go through middle companies. If we sue, we expose our illegal tax structures. We'd be admitting to fraud." The room went silent. "How bad?" Margaret asked quietly. "Federal investigation is bad," Howard said. "RICO charges are bad." Edward's voice cracked. "So what do we do? Just let him destroy us?" "I'm saying we can't touch him legally," Howard replied. Margaret sighed. "City Hall won't help either. I've called every contact I have. Everyone's suddenly too busy." He's gotten to them first. Charles, the CFO, spoke up. Goldman called again. "They're reviewing our loan portfolio. If we miss deadlines, they can call our loans early." "How much?" $420 million. Due in 30 days. The air left the room. Edward rubbed his face. "We could maybe sell assets for half." "No investor will touch us now," Charles said. "Not with our stock crashing." "Then I'll go to Navarro myself," Edward said suddenly. "Offer him money, anything." Margaret looked at him sadly. "He doesn't want money, Edward. He wants you to suffer." "What was I supposed to do?" Edward snapped. "Throw my son under the bus?" "Yes," Margaret said, her voice sharp as glass. "That's exactly what you should have done. You should have apologized, fired Julian, done the right thing. Instead, you blamed the victim, and now we're paying for it." The room fell into heavy silence. Across town, Julian sat in a dark Soho nightclub, surrounded by laughter, music, and flashing lights. His phone buzzed with missed calls from his father and the company's executives, but he ignored them all. "Your dad's blowing up your phone," his friend Tyler said. Julian smirked. "He always does. He'll fix it. He always does. But not this time." He had no idea that the family empire was crumbling because of his careless cruelty. Back in the boardroom, Edward's phone buzzed again. A new message. "Your lawyers are right. You can't sue me. Your politicians won't help. You built your empire on my foundation, Edward. And I can tear it down brick by brick. The question is, how much do you want to lose before you're ready to talk?" Edward stared at the screen, his hands shaking. "He wants me to suffer," Edward whispered. "To feel powerless." Margaret looked at him sadly. "Then maybe you should beg," she said. "Before there's nothing left to save." Edward looked around the table, at the tired, fearful faces of people who depended on him. If Crane Group fell, they'd all go down with it. And as the night deepened over Manhattan, one truth became painfully clear. Edward Crane wasn't fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for survival. He thought about Julian, probably drunk somewhere in a club, not caring about a thing. He thought about Elena Ruiz, the woman he had dismissed as a nobody, a person beneath his notice. And he thought about the press release he'd approved, the one that blamed her for being unprofessional, even though he knew she had done nothing wrong. Margaret had been right all along. He'd made the wrong choice at every turn. Every lie, every act of arrogance, every time he protected Julian instead of doing the right thing. It was all coming back now, like a debt finally being collected. "Set up a meeting," Edward said quietly. "With Navarro." Howard looked uneasy. "He's not answering, sir." "Then send a message through his office," Edward said, his voice rough. He paused, tasting the words like poison. Tell him Edward Crane is ready to apologize. Properly this time." Howard nodded and left without another word. Edward sank into his chair, the exhaustion weighing on him like lead. He suddenly felt every one of his 58 years. In just 4 days, his empire, the company he'd built over 3 decades, had gone from thriving to falling apart. And the man responsible wasn't some billionaire rival or a corrupt politician. It was someone Edward had never even considered important. His phone buzzed. A new message appeared on the screen. "Tomorrow. Come alone. Address to follow." Edward stared at it for a long time. The war was over. What came next was surrender. Day 5. Raphael sat in a small diner in Queens across from 3 men in suits. They looked out of place, bankers from Manhattan sitting among truck drivers and construction workers. But they didn't care. They were nervous, desperate men trying to get rid of something before it exploded in their hands. "Let me get this straight," said Michael Chun from Chase Bank. "You want to buy Crane Group's construction debt now? Everyone knows they're having problems." "That's exactly why we want to buy," Raphael said calmly, stirring his coffee. "My clients specialize in distressed assets. We see opportunity where others see risk." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Your clients being Sentinel Capital Partners?" "Yes," Raphael said. "A private equity firm. Very quiet. Very well funded." He slid the documents across the table. They looked legitimate. Contracts, signatures, transfer paperwork. But behind them was only a shell company in the Cayman Islands that existed on paper and nothing else. "We're prepared to purchase the Hudson Yards and Tribeca debt at 90 cents on the dollar," Raphael said. Michael and his colleague from Goldman Sachs, Lisa Park, exchanged glances. The total debt was worth $180 million. Selling it at 90% would mean a small loss, but it would also mean getting rid of a ticking time bomb. "Why are you so eager?" Lisa asked. "Because in 3 months," Raphael said with a smile, "Crane Group will recover, and that debt will be worth its full value again. We're patient. We believe in them. But the offer expires at noon." It was a lie. Marco didn't think Crane Group would recover. He knew they wouldn't. But the bankers didn't need to know that. Michael frowned, checking his phone. "We'll need time to review this." "No time," Raphael said, standing. "Noon deadline. Take it or keep riding the Crane sinking ship." He placed his card on the table. "Call me when you decide." By 9:30 a.m., Raphael had met with 2 more banks. The same pitch. The same fake confidence. The same deadline. By 10:15, his phone started to ring. Chase agreed first. 90 cents on the dollar for Hudson Yards. $85 million wired before lunch. Goldman followed at 10:47, Tribeca and part of the Queen's debt. Another $95 million. At 11:20, a smaller regional bank gave up the Brooklyn debt for 85 cents on the dollar. $48 million gone in an instant. By noon, Marco's web of shell companies owned $228 million in Crane Group debt, about 35% of their total loans. Raphael called Marco from his car. "It's done," he said. "We own them." "Good," Marco replied calmly. "Now we wait." At 1:15 p.m., Edward's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Robert Crawford, Chase Bank. "Robert," Edward said, sounding tired. "What is it now?" "Edward," Robert began carefully, "I just wanted to let you know about a recent transaction. We sold your Hudson Yards debt this morning." You what? Edward snapped, sitting up. It's standard practice, Robert said quickly. Banks sell loans all the time to manage portfolio risk. Your new lender is a private equity firm called Sentinel Capital Partners. Who are they? Offshore firm. They specialize in distressed assets. We're not distressed, Edward said angrily. Robert sighed. Edward, your stock is down 9%. 3 major projects are delayed. The media's asking questions. From our side, selling that debt was smart. How much did you sell? Just Hudson Yards. 85 million. Edward's stomach twisted. Who else is selling? I can't say. Robert, Edward said darkly. Who else? You might want to call Goldman, Robert said, sounding nervous. Edward hung up and immediately dialed Lisa Park at Goldman Sachs. We were about to call you, Lisa said defensively. Given current conditions, we had to make some adjustments. How much? 95 million, she admitted. Tribeca and part of Queens. Look, Edward, this doesn't change anything. You still make payments, same terms, just to a new lender. To who? To Sentinel Capital. And a few others. This isn't normal, Edward snapped. You're all abandoning me in the middle of my biggest projects. We're managing risk, Lisa said flatly. We've done business with you for a decade, but right now, this was necessary. I'm sorry. She didn't sound sorry. She sounded relieved. Your new lenders will reach out soon. Then she hung up. Edward sat frozen, his heart pounding. 2 major banks had dumped his debt in one morning. That didn't happen unless someone was behind it, someone who wanted control. His phone rang again. Charles, his CFO. Tell me you've heard, Edward said. I heard, Charles said. It's worse. Regional Trust Bank sold our Brooklyn debt too. That's 3 banks, $228 million total. Gone. To who? Different names, Charles said. Sentinel Capital, Hudson Investment, Riverside Holdings. All private equity, all offshore. I tried researching them. No history, no filings, nothing. It's like they appeared out of thin air. Edward's blood ran cold. They're shell companies. That's my guess, Charles said quietly. Probably all controlled by the same person. Navarro, Edward whispered. Almost certainly. Edward stood and walked to the window. Outside, cranes dotted the skyline, his skyline. But it didn't feel like his anymore. What can he do with that debt? He asked. Anything, Charles said. He can call it early if we miss deadlines. He can demand full repayment. He can force bankruptcy. In 48 hours, he's gone from being your supplier to being your creditor. He controls the company. The truth hit Edward like a physical blow. This wasn't just revenge. It was a takeover, planned, timed, executed perfectly. Disrupt the projects. Tank the stock. Scare the banks. Buy the debt cheap. Own the empire. How do we fight this? Edward asked weakly. We can't, Charles said. He's already won. The question now is what terms he'll offer. Edward's phone buzzed again. Check your bank accounts. Notice anything different? That's what powerless feels like. See you tomorrow at 10 a.m. 847, with Avenue, Brooklyn. Come alone. Bring your son. Bring your son. This wasn't just about him anymore. Julian was part of it now. Edward forwarded the message. Be there. No excuses. Then he sat back, staring at the ceiling. In just 4 days, Marco Navarro had taken $1 billion empire and turned it into a puppet. All because of 1 glass of Coca-Cola. All because Edward had forgotten who really held the power. The men who built the foundations. The emergency board meeting restarted at 8 p.m. Julian was there this time. He'd shown up angry, pulled away from a dinner date by his father's message. Conference room. Your future depends on it. Now, sitting at the long table between executives who wouldn't even look at him, Julian's anger was fading into confusion. "Someone explain what's happening," Julian said, "and why I had to cancel my plans." Edward looked at his son, really looked at him. The perfect haircut, the $1,000 suit, the Rolex that cost more than most people's cars. 27 years old, and he'd never faced a real consequence in his life. That was about to change. "Tell him," Edward said to Charles. "Tell him what his little prank cost us." Charles stood and turned on the projector. Charts and numbers appeared on the screen. "In the last 4 days," Charles said, "Crane Group stock has dropped 11%. We've lost $180 million in market value. 3 major projects are shut down. 2 city permits are frozen. And as of this morning, we no longer control 35% of our debt." Julian frowned. "What does that mean?" Margaret's voice was cold. "It means someone bought our loans. Someone who now has the power to bankrupt us any time they choose." "Who?" Julian asked quietly. "Marco Navarro," Edward said. "The husband of the woman you poured Coca-Cola on for fun." Julian's face went pale. "The waitress." "Her name is Elena Ruiz," Margaret snapped. "And her husband controls half the construction supply in New York City. He's been dismantling us piece by piece because of what you did." "That's insane," Julian shouted. "Over a drink? Over humiliation," Edward yelled, slamming his fist on the table. "You humiliated his wife in front of hundreds of people, and I stood there and did nothing. I even approved a press release blaming her." "I thought," Julian began. "I thought she was nobody." "She's somebody," Howard said quietly. "And her husband just destroyed us because of it." Julian turned to Edward. "You were there." "I saw the whole thing," Edward said, voice cracking. "I saw it, and I stayed silent because I didn't want to make a scene. I was protecting you, like I always do." "So it's my fault?" Julian shouted. "You run this company. And I've spent years cleaning up your messes." Edward yelled back. "Every DUI, every scandal, I fixed it all. But not this. You didn't just humiliate a woman. You picked a fight with a man who builds cities." The room was silent. Julian's hands shook. "How bad is it?" "We're facing bankruptcy," Charles said flatly. "In 30 days, if we can't refinance $420 million, and Navarro holds that debt." "So refinance." "No bank will touch us," Margaret interrupted. "He's made us radioactive. No one wants to come near us." "Then sue him," Julian said desperately. "We can't," Howard said. "Some of our past business with him was shady. If we sue, we risk federal charges." "So we're trapped," Julian whispered. "Yes," Edward said. "And it's your fault." "It's our fault," Margaret corrected. "Edward could have fired you. Could have apologized to Elena. But he didn't. None of us did. And now we're paying for it." "What happens tomorrow?" Julian asked quietly. "Tomorrow," Edward said, "we will meet with Navarro. You and me. And we accept whatever terms he gives." "What kind of terms?" "I don't know. But I'm sure they'll involve you." Edward leaned forward. "You're going to apologize to his wife. Publicly. On camera. And you're going to mean it. Because if you don't, we lose everything." "You want me to humiliate myself?" Julian said bitterly. "I want you to feel a fraction of what you made her feel," Edward said, his voice trembling. "Do you even remember her face? When that soda hit her? When did everyone laugh?" Julian stayed silent. "You don't, do you?" Edward said. "Because to you, she wasn't real. None of them are, the workers, the staff. But they're real to men like Navarro. And now he's teaching us that lesson." Simon Burke cleared his throat. "What about telling the press our side?" "And say what?" Margaret asked. "That we're the victims?" We'd look pathetic. Maybe offer him money, another board member said. He doesn't want money, Edward said. He showed them Marco's texts. He wants justice. The room went quiet. He's going to destroy us, someone whispered. No, Edward said. He's going to make us destroy ourselves, unless we finally give him what he deserves, accountability. Edward stood. The meeting was adjourned. Julian and I have to prepare. Everyone left. Julian stayed behind, staring at his hands. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know. You never know, Edward said softly. That's the problem. You think the world bends for you. But men like Navarro don't care about your name or your money. They care about respect. And you took that from him. What's going to happen to me? Julian whispered. I don't know, Edward said, looking out at the city. But tomorrow, we'll both find out. 847, With Avenue wasn't what Edward expected. No tall tower. No marble floors. Just a plain brick building in Brooklyn with a faded sign. Navarro Construction Supply. A few trucks. Dusty windows. This simple place had destroyed his empire. Edward and Julian arrived at 9:55 a.m. in Edward's Mercedes. They hadn't spoken the whole ride. Julian looked exhausted, terrified. Let me do the talking, Edward said as they got out. I wasn't planning to say anything, Julian muttered. A man in his 40s met them at the door. Mr. Crane, I'm Rafael Costa. Follow me. They walked through the warehouse filled with heavy machinery, then up a metal staircase. The office was small, bare walls, a metal desk, a few filing cabinets, a window overlooking the yard. And behind the desk, in jeans and a work shirt, sat Marco Navarro. He looked nothing like what Edward had expected. There was no fancy suit, no intimidating look, just a man who could have passed for any construction foreman in the city. But his eyes were different. They were dark, intelligent, and completely calm. Sit, Marco said. Edward and his son, Julian, sat in the two chairs in front of the desk. Raphael stood by the door, his arms crossed. Marco didn't speak. He just stared at them, the silence growing heavier with every second. Finally, Edward cleared his throat. Thank you for meeting with us. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Marco's voice was quiet but sharp. No misunderstanding. Your son poured Coca-Cola on my wife's head. You watched and said nothing. Then you released a press statement blaming her. Edward tried to stay calm. That statement was a mistake. We were just trying to control the situation. You were trying to make it her fault, Marco interrupted, his tone still cold. You wanted to make it go away, as if she didn't matter. Marco leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Edward. Do you know what Elena did that night after your son humiliated her? She came home and told me work was fine. She lied, to protect me. To protect you? Edward asked, unsure. Yes. Because she was afraid of what might happen if I found out, Marco said. Edward had no response. She's worked at that hotel for 4 years, Marco continued. Never missed a day. Never complained. She's proud of what she does. And your son treated her like garbage, for fun. Julian finally spoke, his voice shaky. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking. You're always drunk, Marco shot back. You're always not thinking. He turned his gaze on Julian, and it felt like the temperature in the room dropped. I know about your DUIs, your harassment complaints, your settlements. You've spent your whole life thinking your money makes you untouchable. Today, you learn that it doesn't. Mr. Navarro, Edward said quickly, trying to keep things calm. We want to make this right. Whatever you want, compensation, a public apology, just name it. I don't need anything from you, Marco said quietly. He stood up and walked toward the window. In 4 days, I've taken your company to the edge of collapse. Your stock is down 11%. Your projects are frozen. And your bank sold your debt to me. I now own 35% of your financial oxygen. He turned back to face them. I could go further. I could call your loans, make you default, and watch you go bankrupt. Then I could buy everything you own for pennies on the dollar. Edward's face turned pale. But that's not what I want, Marco continued. What do you want? Edward asked, his voice almost a whisper. I want you to understand something, Marco said as he walked back to his desk. You build towers, luxury apartments where rich people live. But you don't actually build them. Men like me do. We pour the concrete, lay the steel, run the wires. Without us, you have nothing but drawings and meetings. You forgot that. You forgot that the people who actually build your empire matter. So I reminded you. Edward nodded slowly. You made your point. We understand. Good, Marco said. Then here are my terms. He pulled a single sheet of paper from his desk and slid it across to Edward. No negotiations. Edward read it. His face was drained of color. Julian leaned over his shoulder to read too. First, Marco said, a public apology. Both of you. On television. To Elena. You'll admit what happened and take full responsibility. No excuses. My PR team will work with yours. Agreed, Edward said quickly. Second, Marco went on, a $50 million donation to the Hospitality Workers Relief Fund. It helps restaurant and hotel workers who've faced abuse. The money must be sent before the press conference. Edward's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Done. Third, Marco said, I want 15% ownership in your Hudson Yards tower. Transfer it to one of my companies. I don't want control, just a piece of what I helped you build. Julian blurted out, that's worth $80 million. I know, Marco said calmly. Consider it payment for the empire I let you keep. Edward closed his eyes and took a deep breath. 80 million plus 50 million. 130 million total. But the alternative is losing everything. Acceptable. Fourth, Marco said, turning to Julian, you disappear. No public appearances. No parties. No interviews. You stop representing the Crane Group. You become invisible. For how long? Julian asked, his voice tight with anger. Until I say otherwise, Marco said. It could be a year, or it could be 5. You'll still work for the company, but quietly. No spotlight. No scandals. Julian's face went red. You can't do that. I can, Marco replied evenly. And I just did. You wanted to humiliate someone for fun. Now you'll learn what real humiliation feels like, being nothing. Julian, Edward said sharply, agree. Dad. Agree, or we lose everything. Julian clenched his fists, his voice barely a whisper. Fine. Marco pulled out 4 copies of a contract. These make it official. Sign them. Edward's hand trembled as he signed all 4. Julian followed, his signature angry and messy. Marco signed last and handed 2 copies back to them. The press conference is tomorrow at noon, he said. My office will send details. The donation must be cleared tonight. It will, Edward promised. Marco stood up. The meeting was over. As they reached the door, Marco said, one more thing. Elena doesn't know what I did. She doesn't know I have this kind of power. She thinks I'm just a contractor who got lucky. I want to keep it that way. We won't say anything, Edward said quickly. Good, Marco said. His voice softened slightly. She's a good person. Better than anyone in this room. What you did to her was unforgivable, but I'm giving you a chance to make it right. Don't waste it. Edward nodded silently. They left the warehouse, climbed into their Mercedes, and drove away from the plain brick building where their empire had been saved, at the cost of their pride. $130 million, Julian said finally. For spilling a drink. No, Edward said hollowly. For forgetting that other people matter. Thinking about money protects us from consequences. They drove back to Manhattan in silence. Back in his office, Marco made a phone call. "It's done," he told Raphael. "Press conference tomorrow. After that, release the supply chains. Let their projects continue. Keep the debt, it's our insurance. If they step out of line again, we crush them." He hung up and looked at Elena's picture on his desk. Tomorrow she'd see justice, and she'd never know what war he fought to make it happen. The next day, the Crane Group's press conference was set for noon. By 11:30, the lobby was full of reporters. Normally, corporate apologies didn't attract CNN and the New York Times. But this story was different. The Elena Ruiz incident had become a symbol of wealth, arrogance, and justice. Elena sat in her Brooklyn apartment, watching the live stream on her laptop. Marco had told her that morning, "Watch the news at noon. Trust me." She was confused, but she did as he said. When she saw the Crane Group logo appear, her stomach tightened. The press room buzzed with noise. Cameras clicked. Then Edward and Julian Crane walked in. They looked completely different from their confident photos at the gala. Edward's face was pale. Julian's smirk was gone. They sat down at a plain table. No PR team, no lawyers. Just two men facing the world. Edward began. "Thank you for coming. We called this press conference to address an incident that happened last week at a charity gala." He took a deep breath. "My son, Julian, poured a drink on a waitress named Elena Ruiz. He did it deliberately while others laughed and filmed. I was there. I saw it happen. And I did nothing." The room fell silent except for the sound of cameras. "Afterward," Edward continued, "our company released a statement blaming Ms. Ruiz. That was false. She did nothing wrong. She was doing her job when my son humiliated her. What my son did was horrible. What I did, standing by, then blaming her, was just as bad. We thought our wealth made us better than others. We were wrong. Ms. Ruiz, I am deeply sorry." He turned to the camera. "You deserved respect and kindness. We gave you cruelty. There is no excuse." He looked at Julian, who hesitated, then leaned toward the microphone. "I was drunk," Julian said softly. "But that's not an excuse. I did it because I thought it was funny. Because I thought people like you didn't matter. I was wrong. I'm sorry." A reporter raised her hand. "Are you apologizing because you mean it, or because your company is falling apart?" "Both," Edward said without hesitation. "We're suffering the consequences of our actions. And we deserve to." "What kind of consequences?" another reporter asked. "Our stock dropped, our investors pulled out, our projects were delayed," Edward answered. "The market responded to our moral failure, and that's fair." Another asked, "Is it true you've lost major assets?" "We're donating $50 million to the Hospitality Workers Relief Fund," Edward said, "and transferring ownership shares to charity. It's not punishment, it's restitution." "Mr. Julian Crane," another voice called, "will you continue to represent your company?" "I'll still work," Julian said quietly, "but not in public. I need to learn that being seen is a privilege, not a right." The humiliation on his face was real. The press conference lasted 20 minutes. They answered every question honestly. When it ended, they walked out slowly, looking smaller and older. Elena sat frozen. Tears streamed down her face. They had really apologized, on live TV, in front of the world. Her phone buzzed non-stop. "Did you see? They actually did it. You won." In a coffee shop across town, Marco watched on his phone. Raphael sat beside him. "It's already got 2 million views," Raphael said. "Trending #1 on Twitter." Online, people were amazed. This is what real accountability looks like. Rich people are finally facing consequences. By the afternoon, the story had taken over every news channel. And quietly, across the city, Marco's influence was felt. "Cement trucks are rolling again," Nate said over the phone. "Steel's being delivered to Tribeca," Leo added. "Permits are approved," Frank said with a grin. The war was over. Marco had given the signal. By evening, Crane Group's stock had risen again. Investors calmed down. Banks stopped panicking. Edward received messages praising how he had handled the crisis. The empire was stable again, but everyone knew who really controlled it now. Marco Navarro held the strings. That night, Marco came home to his Brooklyn brownstone. Elena was in the kitchen, cooking dinner while the TV replayed clips of the press conference. She turned when he walked in, her eyes red. "Did you see?" she asked. "I saw," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I can't believe they actually apologized," she whispered. "I thought people like them never faced consequences." "Everyone faces consequences eventually," Marco said softly. "Sometimes it just takes longer." Elena looked at him, curious. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm just glad you got justice," he said. She studied him for a moment but didn't press. "Thank you for being here. For supporting me." "Always," Marco said quietly. They ate dinner together, watching the news. Elena smiled for the first time in a week, reading messages of support from strangers. She didn't know that her husband had just fought a silent war for her, buying debts, controlling banks, and dismantling an empire without firing a shot. Because someone had forgotten that the woman serving drinks was someone's wife. And Marco Navarro had reminded them. A week later, life in the city moved on. But in boardrooms and construction offices, people still whispered about the Crane case. Marco sat in his living room, reading the Wall Street Journal. The headline read, "Crane Group recovers after turbulent week." Elena came downstairs, wearing Marco's old sweatshirt. She sat beside him on the couch. "Still reading about it?" she asked. "Just checking the aftermath," he said. She hesitated. "Marco, how did all this really happen?" The apology, the press conference, it felt like more than just public pressure. He set the paper down. "What do you think happened?" "I think," she said slowly, "the Cranes had some very bad luck. Construction problems, financial problems. Problems that made them want to make things right." "That's one way to see it," Marco said. "And I think," she continued, "my husband might know more about those problems than he's telling me." "Would you really want to know?" he asked. She thought for a long time. "You didn't just stand up for me," she said quietly. "You took down an empire, didn't you?" Marco smiled faintly. "No, amore. I just reminded them who builds their foundations." "How much of it was you? Does it matter?" "I guess not," she said softly. "Just tell me, are you safe? You didn't do anything illegal, right?" "Everything I did was legal," Marco said. "Complicated, but legal. And it's over now." She smiled. "Whatever you did or didn't do, thank you." "That's not negotiable," he said. 3 weeks later, Julian Crane's Instagram went silent. No more yachts, no more clubs, no more parties. He worked quietly in a small office, reviewing paperwork. He hated it, but he finally understood what it felt like to be invisible. Edward met with Marco once a month, always at the same warehouse. "The Hudson Yards Tower is ahead of schedule," Edward reported. "Good," Marco said. "And the charity?" "50 million are already helping workers," Edward said. "Your son. He's quieter now. Learning something, I think." "Good," Marco said simply. Edward hesitated. "Thank you for not destroying us." "I didn't need to," Marco said. "I just needed you to understand." Edward nodded. "I do." He left, a changed man. Elena returned to her job at the Riverside Grand Hotel. The staff applauded when she walked in. Even her manager apologized. She worked her shift with pride. Some customers recognized her. They were polite now, careful. At the end of one shift, an old woman left a note with her tip. "Thank you for showing them that dignity matters." Elena smiled and slipped the note into her pocket. That night, she came home to Marco trying, and failing, to cook pasta. "How was work?" he asked. Good, she said, smiling. People were kind. I think I'm going to be okay. You've always mattered, Marco said softly. Some people just needed reminding. She laughed. My mysterious husband who builds foundations. That's me, he said, smiling back. They ate the terrible pasta and laughed together, talking about their day like any ordinary couple. To the world, they were just a contractor and a waitress living in Brooklyn. No one knew that Marco Navarro secretly controlled the city's construction empire, or that he had quietly taught its most powerful men a lesson about respect. And that was fine. All Marco wanted was for Elena to smile when she came home, to feel safe, valued, and loved. Everything else, money, towers, and power, was just concrete and steel. And that was exactly how Marco wanted it. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more kind and powerful stories. Watch our next video for another unforgettable journey. And share this story with someone who needs it today.